All right, let's jump right into this. Welcome to our Explainer, where we are looking at the absolute architects of America. We're going to unpack a really fascinating source today that actually counts down the 10 greatest presidents in United States history. And hey, we're not just looking at dry lists of facts here. No, we are breaking down the extreme crises, the iron wills, and the frankly unbelievable feats that shaped an entire nation. Honestly, these leaders were so legendary, they kind of make the rest of us look like we're playing an amateur hour. So, the crucial point we need to ask ourselves right off the bat is this: what actually makes a truly legendary president? Is it raw intellect? Is it sheer physical toughness? Or maybe it's the ability to stay perfectly calm when the entire world is literally on the brink of absolute destruction? Well, it turns out it's a crazy mix of all these things, and the answers we found in the source material might actually surprise you. Because over the course of this explainer, we're going to look at a man who took a literal bullet to the chest and just kept right on speaking. We're going to see a president who completely wiped out the national debt. I mean, down to absolute zero. And we'll examine a leader who stopped a global nuclear war simply by keeping his cool. I'm telling you, these are the craziest, most high-stakes feats of leadership you can possibly imagine.
Okay, moving into section 1, stability, strategy, and constitution.
Let's look at Calvin Coolidge, for example. People called him Silent Cal because the guy practically never spoke. Actually, there's this great story where a dinner guest once told him she'd made a bet she could get more than 2 words out of him. His response? You lose. I mean, how iconic is that? But here's the thing, his quiet nature was actually his superpower. He inherited a government that was just drowning in scandal from the previous administration. Cronies were practically looting the place. But Coolidge? He just quietly cleaned house. He restored public trust, slashed the national debt, lowered taxes, and ushered in the incredibly prosperous Roaring Twenties. He essentially just got out of the way and let the country thrive.
Now, in stark contrast, you have James Madison. This guy was just 5'4" and maybe 100 pounds soaking wet, literally the smallest president in U.S. history. But intellectually, oh, he was an absolute giant. He drafted most of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. That earned him the title of Father of the Constitution. And because he literally wrote the playbook, well, he naturally knew it better than anyone when he took office. He actually used that strategic brilliance to stand up to British bullying, like when they were kidnapping American sailors, and successfully led the country through the War of 1812, proving once and for all that America wouldn't be pushed around. And speaking of the War of 1812, that brings us right to Andrew Jackson, who famously crushed a massive British army at the Battle of New Orleans. Jackson was actually the first president born poor, completely clawing his way to the top, and he took that gritty, anti-elite fighting spirit straight to the White House. He dismantled the Second Bank of the United States and became the only president in history to wipe the national debt completely to zero. Zero. Now, the source material does importantly note that alongside this massive financial feat, his legacy carries the devastating, permanent stain of the Trail of Tears and the forced relocation of Native Americans. It's a deeply complex, dark reality of his time in office that absolutely cannot be ignored. Which brings us to Section 2, Populism and Cold War Cool. So, John F. Kennedy, the youngest elected president. He faced what was arguably the ultimate test of leadership when the Soviets placed nuclear missiles in Cuba, literally 90 miles off the coast of Florida. For 13 agonizing days, the whole world was inches away from nuclear annihilation. His generals were practically begging him to invade with military force, but JFK, he kept his cool. He negotiated and successfully got the missiles removed without firing a single shot. But JFK wasn't just about crisis management. He was a true visionary. His whole philosophy was brilliantly captured when he said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." And he used that exact spirit to challenge the entire nation to do the impossible. He literally launched the space race, challenging America to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade. He had this unique way of making the impossible feel like a shared national duty. All right, Section 3, Expanding Borders and Rebuilding. James K. Polk is highly underrated, mostly because he did something incredibly rare in politics. He delivered exactly what he promised. No joke. He came into office with 4 very specific goals: acquire California, settle the Oregon boundary, lower tariffs, and establish an independent treasury. And guess what? He accomplished every single one. He expanded the U.S. by over 1.2 million square miles, which is more than any other president, by the way. And because he promised to only serve one term, he got all this done and then just promptly left. Unbelievable efficiency. Next up, we look at a president who stayed a bit longer,
Elected 4 times, actually. Franklin Delano Roosevelt. FDR inherited an absolute nightmare, the Great Depression. We're talking 25% unemployment and citizens literally starving in the streets. But he didn't just give pep talks. He launched the New Deal. He put millions of Americans to work building the Hoover Dam, the Blue Ridge Parkway, courthouses, schools. I mean, he practically rebuilt the country from the ground up. But FDR's true crucible came later, with World War II. To put this in perspective, in 1939, the U.S. Army was actually smaller than Portugal's. But by 1945, under his leadership, it grew to 12 million soldiers supported by this unmatched arsenal of democracy right at home. And what makes this display of absolute power even more astounding is the sheer willpower behind it. He did all of this while hiding a severe disability. Paralyzed by polio back in 1921, he secretly navigated the entire presidency from a wheelchair, literally wearing heavy steel leg braces to stand tall for the public. Why? Because he knew the country desperately needed to see strength. Moving on to Section 4, Paradoxes, Progress, and Power. Thomas Jefferson was, to put it mildly, a walking paradox. As the source beautifully outlines, he was this true Renaissance man, an architect, an inventor, a brilliant philosopher. He's the guy who wrote All Men Are Created Equal, and yet he owned slaves. He heavily criticized big government, yet the moment he became president, he massively expanded executive power. He was very much a man of his time, but it was exactly that paradoxical brilliance that allowed him to take massive, bold actions, like flat out refusing to pay ransoms to North African pirates and just sending in the Marines instead. But perhaps his boldest executive action of all came when Napoleon was completely broke. Jefferson just bypassed all the usual red tape and bought the entire Louisiana Territory for $15 million. Do the math on that. That is 3 cents an acre. 3 cents! With a single signature, he doubled the size of the United States. And, always the visionary, he didn't stop there. She immediately sent Lewis and Clark out to map every plant, animal, and river all the way out to the Pacific Ocean. Now moving to another truly larger-than-life figure, Theodore Roosevelt. Get this, during a campaign stop, Teddy Roosevelt was literally shot in the chest by an assassin. He opens his coat, sees the blood, and famously declares, "It takes more than that to kill a bull moose." And then he proceeds to finish his 90-minute speech, with a bullet lodged right near his heart. I mean, that is just an unparalleled level of sheer grit. No way around it. But, to really understand Teddy's iron will, you have to realize he wasn't born tough, not at all. He was a really sickly, severe asthmatic as a child. He deliberately forced himself to build his body through lifting weights, boxing, and hiking. And that intense personal transformation translated directly into his presidency. He became the ultimate trust buster, filing 44 antitrust lawsuits against massive monopolies like Standard Oil, just to force them to play by the rules. At the same time, he was this massive champion for nature, establishing the national park system and protecting 230 million acres of public land. Finally, Section 5, Saving and Defining America. Abraham Lincoln inherited a nation literally tearing itself apart. Before he was even inaugurated, states had already seceded. Then came the Civil War, which cost over 600,000 lives. It was horrific. His generals failed him, his own cabinet constantly doubted him, and the public literally begged him to quit. But Lincoln? He absolutely refused. He issued the Emancipation Proclamation, transforming the war into a fight for freedom itself. And yet, it only took him 272 words at Gettysburg to completely redefine the nation's purpose. 2 minutes of speaking, that's it. And those words still echo through history today, proving that the promise of liberty was worth fighting for, even though he tragically gave his own life for it just days after the war ended. And at last, we reached the original GOAT, George Washington. Think about what this man did. He commanded a starving, shoeless army against the greatest military superpower on Earth. He lost New York. His men froze at Valley Forge. But he just never quit. When the revolution was on life support, he crossed the freezing Delaware River on Christmas night for a completely bold surprise attack. Against all impossible odds, he held his men together for 8 grueling years until achieving total victory at Yorktown. But here's what makes him truly remarkable. As president, Washington was a completely blank slate. He didn't just occupy the office. He had to define its very boundaries from scratch. He set the precedents that still govern the U.S. today, establishing a maximum of 2 terms, ensuring the peaceful transfer of power, creating a cabinet of advisors. Furthermore, in his farewell address,
He warned of political parties and foreign alliances, warnings that, let's be honest, feel incredibly relevant today. He literally designed the modern presidency. Which brings us to what might be the ultimate measure of true leadership. After winning the Revolutionary War, Washington easily could have been king. The army loved him, the people absolutely worshipped him. But he walked away. Even King George III noted that if Washington gave up power, he would be the greatest man in the world. And he did just that. So the absolute crucial point I want to leave you with today as we wrap up this explainer on these historical titans is this. Many people throughout history can wield power, but how many truly have the power to just let it go? Think about that for a bit. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in the next explainer.